we know that the short-term rental accommodation legislation who came into force last July is now coming into impact on the 1st of November. And for some people, that requires going on to one of the government departments and registering their properties.
Yes.
However, there are some exemptions. And what we want to talk about tonight is we want to talk about those exemptions. And we have Joan Bird, who is a member, or who was a member of the board for Astra, who basically led the challenge or led the charge.
We were part of the working committee.
Part of the working committee. Right. Joan's no longer on that committee.
No, I've stepped up.
You stepped up. So, Joan, tell us what you're up to.
For those of you who don't know who I am or what I do, I'm a Class 1 licensed registered real estate agent, which means I'm legally able to operate and supervise my own business. As Olivia said, for 3 years I was on the board of Astra, and during that time it was the end of the culmination of a 7-year process. Started with government inquiry into short-term rental accommodation, holiday accommodation in New South Wales. Of course, this all started with Airbnb. So earlier in the year, I resigned from Astra, and I am now a member of. There's Kevin Anderson as Minister for Innovation, basically fair trading, formed what is called the Property Services Review Panel, and I'm a member of that. I'm on there as the only working agent on the panel, which leads to some very interesting discussions, and there to represent the regional working agents in New South Wales. However, the short-term rental stuff is still, I promised Astra when I resigned that I would still carry the flag for that, because nobody understands it. So, moving forward, unfortunately government made 2 departments work together and it hasn't worked very well. Surprise, surprise. The Department of Fair Trading were responsible for the introduction of the Code of Conduct, which came into effect on December 18 last year. It's under an amendment of the Fair Trading Act, Section 54A. That's how well I know it. Okay, then the second part is the registration process that was due to be introduced in July. It was put off, is now mandated November 1, but there are apparently some rumblings around it. I would not be surprised if we see another deferral.
Okay. Another what?
Deferral.
So same as Byron Bay?
We shall see. Okay, they have. Alright, so this is where our government were blindsided by the Australian Hotels Association, the Australian Resident Accommodation Managers Association, they mandated that the Code of Conduct in this registration process was only applicable to residential dwellings. Right? Because apparently nothing else exists as far as planning we're aware. Well, planning, you're about to get a very rude shock. And when you work with legislation, you work with the letter of the law.
Yeah.
Right? As Peter has sat with me in meetings in my office going, what are we going to do about it in this town? Stop laughing. Still haven't had a reply. The certain planning manager.
I have spoken to the planning manager.
Who's ignoring my emails? You can edit that bit out.
No, it's live.
Okay, so everybody now, the OTAs, the Airbnbs, the stays, the booking.com, ZL, are all asking for the New South Wales registration numbers.
Yep.
There's a lot of social media chatter, a lot of misinformation about it. Now, the legislation under the Part 1, being the Code of the Fair Trading Amendment, very specifically states residential dwellings. Right? And I argued with planning, or tried to get them to understand there are a lot of other operators that do short-term rentals that are not necessarily residential dwellings. And they went, oh no, there isn't. And then I went, well, what about service apartments? And they went, oh, they've got their own code of conduct. I said, what code of conduct? No idea. It's going to be a very rude shock to them because for the first time ever, planning have actually got to deal with the public, the small operator, the mum and dad. They're kind of used to people like us, but the general public is so far out of the realm of development of planning in this regard.
So
They're not listening. They did not listen. Anyway, so we will move forward. So under the registration process, only residential dwellings need to register. If your DA approval, hang on a second, if your DA approval is anything else other than a residential dwelling, whether it is our council's old holiday dwelling,
The old LEPs.
the old LAPs, if it is a service department, if it is an ecotourism cabin, if it is farm stay, if it is a licensed, registered bed and breakfast, you are exempt from registration.
I want my $65 back.
Absolutely.
I want my $65 back.
I told you that back in the last...
I know I had already done it because I thought I should
No,
do
you
it
didn't,
early.
because it wasn't up.
But so what happens if you've got a house?
You've actually broken the legislation.
If you've got a house, what?
I like to break legislation. I just might add that.
If you've got a house, what do you talk? Just a house, or?
Well, if you've bought a house
Yes.
in Jindabyne
Yes.
and you only live here
Yeah.
part time,
Yep.
So
and the other part of the time you lease it out using either a real estate agent
Doesn't
or
matter.
Doesn't
matter.
How-
Are you
how
exempt
it's
then?
done. No, you are not exempt.
You are not exempt.
It depends. It's not about the occupancy of the house. It's not about who operates the house. It is about the DA approval for the house.
Right. So if you own a property in Thredbo, you're exempt.
Absolutely.
If you own a property in our LGA that has been built with a DA for holiday levy,
You are
you're
exempt.
You're exempt.
So do you have to prove that you're exempt?
Now, this is where it's going to be a really interesting 12 months.
Yes.
Peter says yes.
Our council, contrary to certain amounts of legislation, I will say, mandated at their, am I allowed to say it?
Yeah, of course you are.
Thank you. It was council's opinion, and that was straight from a planner's mouth, that anybody, and I understand why they did it. It was council's opinion that anybody who wanted to do short-term rental in this town had to have a DA's service department. It was actually never mandated in our DCP.
Wow.
Right? And I get why they did it. It was all about fire safety and controlling numbers. You've got to remember at the time, back in 2013,
It was really a hot potato.
where it was very much a hot potato and everybody was reeling from the Childers disaster, the backpackers disaster, where everybody was, so many lost their lives. However, why is it that the rest of us actually have to work within legislation? So, unfortunately, in this town, right now, there is probably 500 short-term rentals that have been, particularly with the numbers that we've had built in them since 2013, that are technically, legally exempt from this registration process.
Because of what the DA says.
Because of what the DA
This
says.
is some of the DAs from the old thing.
Yeah.
I'll give you one example. A two-unit house, dwelling house, 2 units of dwelling house, to be used as holiday accommodation. That's the use on the DA.
Yeah.
Yep.
The application form.
Yeah.
And anyone who has got an application form for front of council had it approved, they can run off to the council and say, I want to look at my DA.
Yep.
And so they'll run there and they can just pull out their approval and say, this is what it says. So I know exactly exactly what it says.
Yep.
And it'll vary from time to time because there's been quite a few changes in the LEP and the process of
Over the years.
over the years.
Absolutely.
And I'm going back to, I can go back to 1990, that's 30 years, you would have had 3 or 4 DAs, which would have perhaps changed each time it was changed, might only be subtle, but it'll be a change.
The wording, yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Now, the problem with the existing DAs, people can go to council and ask to rescind their DA and have their property go back to a residential dwelling.
Wow.
However, why are they
would they
going
do
to
that?
do that?
Yeah.
When they have already paid council $1,600
Yeah.
to get that DA, met all of council's requirements, which are actually now less onerous
Yeah.
than what is in this fire safety standard statement, that anybody who registers ticks a box, says they are meeting the safety standard required, and believe me, this is far less than what I saw in the first draft. The first draft was just ridiculous. It was basically there had to be a hotel. And this is, but the existing DAs in this town do not meet, for the most part, the requirements of this existing fire safety standard.
So perhaps the question needs to be placed differently. Who needs to register?
Only those who want to do short-term accommodation or holiday rental, whatever you want to call it, whose property is a residential dwelling.
So if you've got a residential dwelling, you're living there with your family, you have a spare room?
No, because
A house.
short-term rental has become under these changes, became a exempt development use of residential dwellings. You don't need a separate DA to do short-term rental. That's what they're saying.
Yeah.
At the
That was
moment.
the big win in this.
Yeah.
So that if, and believe me, our council is an acronym in all of this.
Yeah.
There are not many other, at the time I think there was 11 LGAs statewide that required DA approval for short-term rental.
Right, and we were one of them.
And we were one of them. And we're probably the most
Because
onerous.
at that time it was quite popular here and it's
Yeah.
gone by.
So
Don't
really-
forget that was the smaller area than what our bigger area is.
Now, this, no, yes.
No, yes.
Yes and no.
Yes, no.
Yes.
Very clear, thank you.
Yes, no. Typical government response. I'll look into that for you. You know, what is as I said, I'm on this panel with government, and at the moment we've got people in there from fair trade. Oh God, they do these people. They're lovely. That what government is trying to do in every department is drag these people out of their little boxes and get them to go, okay, well, if we're doing this, let's look at this. And they don't want to. My last panel meeting, one of the members brought it up, and I said, probably about 80,000 properties will be registered or claim an exemption by 1st of November, and they almost fell over backwards because they've got no idea. Because up until now, nobody knew. Statesman can share their data, booking.com, and Airbnb,
Yeah.
God help us. And we're definitely not going to. What they have cleverly done, and I was rereading you read legislation and regulation and you pick up something new every time you read it. It is mandated that these online travel agents have to share their data with government. Now, what will happen in the registration process, or those who claim an exemption, that data will go back to government, and those addresses will eventually, because everything's getting wired up, will be checked against Land Titles Office. The information will be sent out to councils. Councils will
Plate on the spot.
Yeah.
Councils will plate on the spot.
Absolutely.
Well,
Wait,
it's just
for
a
once.
job that they just haven't got the resources.
And,
Just that.
quite frankly, there's $65 registration fee
And
was
a-
pittance.
And a
It was an
$25
insult.
annual fee.
Well, I'll tell you what, it's not going to stay. When they see the numbers,
Yeah, it'll go up.
it has to go up.
Yeah.
They can't afford to run a system like theirs on $25 a year. But they, like I said, they don't know the numbers statewide.
Yeah.
So what did you mentioned the fee of 25?
That's the
It's
annual
$65
registration.
registration, and then it's $25 renewal. So every year you have to renew it.
Mm-hmm.
Talking about Airbnb.
No, this is
No.
the planning
The-
portal.
This is the
This
planning
is-
board, yeah.
This is the planning portal.
Airbnb only facilitate the registration.
No,
You
they don't.
Well, no, they do. They,
No, I'm
well,
sorry, Olivia.
Well, as a person
No.
who,
They don't.
what
They
I do,
not.
I'm an Airbnb host.
Okay, you are not an Airbnb host. Number one. This is the problem with the short-term rental industry. It is not an Airbnb. Airbnb are nothing more than a booking portal for you.
That's wrong.
No, I'm sorry.
No, it's not. I'll tell you why it's wrong. Why legally it's wrong. I'll tell you why. Is because a contract needs to have 4 elements to it. 4, not 3. 4 elements to it. And one of them is consideration, is price, is cost. I don't get paid as a host until after the guest arrives. That's not a contract. That I have with the host. I have a contract with Airbnb.
No, I'll actually dig it out for you because this was one of the discussions during the working committee about this. You dig through the 47,000 pages of your listing agreement with Airbnb, and it actually clearly states in there that they are only a booking portal for
Oh,
you.
yeah, they can claim that.
I'm sorry, but
they can claim that.
Hang on.
They can claim that, but
They
they're
can,
not.
that is in, when you sign up to Airbnb, you agree to their terms and conditions.
As does
As does
a
everybody
guest who books on Airbnb.
else. Okay. This is, okay, so why is it that you think that Airbnb is responsible for the contract, and yet you would book with What If?
The difference.
No, they're not. Why?
Why is because, like, for instance, with What If, Home
What
Home
If?
Away and Booking.com, the money goes directly from the guest to the host. Airbnb, all transactions go to Airbnb until after the
I'm
guest
sorry,
arrives.
but you're incorrect. Stays hold guests' money. What if you don't think that there is a lag? Believe me. Stays do exactly the same thing.
As Airbnb, Booking.com don't.
You do. I don't.
Expedia
what-
don't.
Yes, they do.
Certainly not for me.
Not for the ordinary host. Not for you. They don't, as a registered business. But as the host, a single host who uses Expedia portals, stays hold the money. And there was actually an argument at the beginning of this
It goes to my point.
inquiry. But so does every other online. What's the difference with a travel agent?
That's exactly right. That's my point. Airbnb are an online travel agent. They're not a booking service.
It's the same thing.
No, not at all. Because one takes the money, holds the money in trust. and
Well, they
then-
don't hold it in trust, but they hold
That
it.
they hold it. They might make.
So does the
interest out of
travel
it.
agent.
Exactly. That's my point. That's why it's not a booking service.
I bet
That's why Airbnb is not a booking service.
I bet
Because the
you-
money does not go from the guest to the host. The money goes.
But
from
it
the
doesn't
guest
with the
to
travel
booking
agent
service.
either.
That's my point, though.
So they are a booking service. They're an online travel agent.
They are an online travel agent. Remember,
Same
they
thing.
basically accepted the
Same thing.
But the money goes from the guest to the travel agent to the host.
Exactly.
So the contract is between the guest and the travel agent, and the host and the travel agent.
Not according to
So who's
Airbnb.
responsible for the registration?
According to Airbnb.
No,
So,
that-
so my point was.
Point is,
that
who's
as a
responsible
host
for
of
the
Airbnb,
registration? Yeah.
They
No.
facilitate it by saying, and I can show it to you right now. I've now got 41 days left to register for Strata.
No, you've
I
got
go onto
41
their
days to show your registration number
Yeah.
on Airbnb.
Right now, I can show it to you right now. I've got a number of properties on here. And you
So do I, Olivia.
Yeah, absolutely. So you've got to go on there
You don't
You
use
don't
it.
have to, but they facilitate it.
They give you a link.
Yeah, exactly. That's facilitation.
But this is why we've come to this process in Australia and New South Wales, is because of exactly this perception of Airbnb being the short-term rental industry.
Yeah.
You stay in an Airbnb.
Yeah.
You don't stay in an Airbnb. Airbnb do not know their hosts, they do not know their properties, they do not know their guests. They do not facilitate any arrangement in the property, what you as a host do to get into the property.
They're not going to know what's on your DA.
They're
No,
not
they don't. No, absolutely. I'm not saying that they
Absolutely.
do.
They are nothing more than an online travel agent.
They are an online travel agent,
Which are
absolutely.
booking service, same. They are just...
But
they're
the onus is not on them to register. It's on you.
Oh, absolutely. No,
Yeah.
I totally acknowledge that.
What they've been doing, because what they've got is that I'm waiting for my software. My PMS is going to feed into all my portals.
Yeah.
So that's the difference. As a professional manager,
Yeah.
I use a PMS.
Yeah.
And it feeds into Airbnb. I don't sit there and manually update calendars or bookings in Airbnb. It all feeds through automatically for me. That's the difference.
Yeah.
And this is the problem, and this is the perception, and this is why we've come to this. That we've got Airbnb have become the acronym. Now we've got a bunch of cowboys sitting over in San Francisco who are losing money hand over fist, millions of dollars every year. I'll send you, there's a really interesting article came out of the States this week about Airbnb.
30 days. Oh, 20% of Airbnb bookings now for over 30 days.
No, not the skiff thing.
No, okay.
No, not Chesky.
Yeah.
Contradicting himself
Yeah.
with the skiff thing. I
Yeah.
read that. So, sorry to be a little bit heated about that, but this is something I know emphatically well.
Yeah.
And Airbnb are nothing more than a booking portal, online travel agent, whatever you want.
So they're not going to stop
They're
you
not
putting
gonna
your
stop.
stuff on there if you
Why?
don't
No,
register.
The reason,
No, they do.
Hang
They
on.
have
They
to.
do?
They have
Hang
to.
on. The reason they are getting everybody onto these registration numbers is, as I said, they are
Yes.
caught under this legislation.
Yeah. So they're just covering their asses. They just
They're
want
covering
everyone to
their
register,
They want
regardless.
everybody to.
Yeah.
Well, no.
Well, they're going to have to.
Hang on.
If
No,
they're going to stop you
no.
from putting it on Airbnb
No,
if you
hang
don't.
On Airbnb, you can actually go on there and claim an exemption.
Oh, okay. Right.
It allows you
Yes.
to say you are exempt.
Right.
Right. Because
For the time being.
No, but for the time being.
But-
Right, you're
Took
exactly right.
legislation change.
Yeah.
Yeah, no.
In the next, yeah, exactly. Which is, they get their act together. That's what they're going to have to do.
Okay.
How long that might take though is,
Yeah, 12 months.
yeah.
What government have said is that there is going to be a 12-month review process. What they will do is that it will give time
Yeah, from the change of rules.
there will be no changes in the first 12 months. Once the review process takes place, and it will probably be put together about August next year, because I'm going to be busy, and then we'll start the review. Now, the one thing I've learned about government, they only knee-jerk react to the complaints.
No, okay. Well, who's going to complain if they don't have to register? So,
No, what it will, it's been really interesting, and I'll have the figures next meeting. The guests are allowed now to complain about the host.
And a host, same with a guest.
Host, same with the guest.
Yeah.
What is really interesting is the lack of knowledge out there about this.
Yeah.
Because by law, under the Code of Conduct, the OTAs had to make guests aware of the Code of Conduct. But when they did it, it's this tiny little line buried under 47,000 other
Yeah.
things. that
Yeah.
they're
That's a small
doing.
print, isn't it?
It's the small
the
print.
fine print, yeah.
Okay. On an OTA, if you are not a residential dwelling, on Airbnb stays, and by the way, stays rang me today and realised that they've stocked up too, and they've put enough property exemptions in there. That'll be corrected. That you would just go onto an OTA and say, I'm exempt.
Yep.
Now, what will happen under the legislation, the OTAs are required to feed their information back to government. As I said, what will happen is that those
Will be
documents will
identified,
be
yeah.
checked against land titles for ownership. LGAs will be notified, and God knows how they're going to police it.
Yeah.
Right?
That's always been
Now,
the biggest part of the biggest
what
one
is
of it.
going to happen, because see, government is very computerised these days. What they're expecting is councils to be computerised. And
No money.
yeah, more work with no money, and have updated so that all their old DAs are lodged online, and somebody just has to, rather than going to under the Stage Down Memorial Hall and digging them out.
Yeah, yeah.
There are under what is
The archive room's moved.
it'll happen. You know, there will be somebody caught out, and they will get the fine. And the fines for non-compliance are actually massive. Can be a penalty. Government puts out penalty units.
Yeah.
So for a corporation to lie, so if I went on to fed through my PMS and claimed every single one of my properties as being exempt because of their DA approval, I get caught out. It's something like 1,000 penalty units maximum, and I think, what is it?
It's 166.
$200 in penalty units.
Penalty is in the regulations. So
Yes,
the
we've
minister
got-
can put it up.
Absolutely.
No.
So what they do,
They
they don't put dollar figures on
They just-
penalties. They put penalty units. So those,
Yeah, so they
each
account for
unit
inflation,
is worth
yeah.
a certain amount of
It
money.
used to be when I was $110 a unit. Now
Yeah.
it's-
I think
Could
it's
be.
200, isn't
Yeah,
it? Something
and then
like
they
that.
just, if they wanted more money, they just.
Yeah.
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 Regulation which the
Yeah.
government can do with
Yeah.
legislation.
Because
So,
government's got big
Timeless.
money.
it is kind of a timeless thing, and I
And
know
the same goes
I
with the speeding fines too.
really appreciate that I've taken up a lot of
No.
It's
information.
critically important because
Yeah.
as
Well, we don't want anyone being caught out for a start, and we want them to make sure that they're all up to code, which would be one
Yeah.
reason that you'd want to make sure you're doing the right thing.
And I mean, this is the unfortunate part about it. Now, Olivia said he's spent $65 one property,
yeah.
Ree's cutting, to do it. I think your DA actually there, when I sold it to you, said service department.
It is a valid. This is for the farm stay that I've
Oh,
got.
okay.
I paid $65. I won't have to do it
But
for
how
the
many
next 12
cabins
months.
have you got on
2
the, right?
under one roof.
No, they're not. Are they?
Yes, they are.
One roof?
They are under one roof.
So why have I seen
What's the
two
roof?
photos of...
Dual occupancy is just very clever photography. Front and back. So it is one roof. It is one roof. I wouldn't lie to the government.
But
Yeah.
actually, technically, it is 2 properties. Now, but because you've got farm stay...
Because it's exempt now. I know
Dual
that it's exempt.
occupancy.
I
They're
don't do
actually
it.
exempt.
I'll go fetch rate and get my money back.
Yeah, technically, you have breached legislation because by registering, you are saying that you're a residential
Yep.
dwelling, which is ridiculous.
Yeah.
What was your approval at?
Farm stay.
Farm stay. Yeah, eco farm stay. Yeah, well, no, it's not
Farm
farm
stay.
stay, sorry. No, no farm stay. It's ecotourism.
Ecotourism. Ecotourism is exempt.
One of these.
Yeah, now.
But it's a
One of
real
them.
one.
It's a real
It's not a Clayton one, it's a real one.
Yeah. And so it's a really interesting technicality. I know one other real
But do you
estate
think do you think they've done a good job in communicating it?
they've tried. They really have tried.
They really have tried.
They have tried.
Do you think that works? If I go to court and say I really tried?
You know, but hang on a minute. You're talking to somebody whose life is bound by legislation.
Yeah.
That changes every single day of the week, more or less.
Yeah.
And it is my responsibility as a licensed agent to keep up with the legislation. Just because I didn't know there was a change is not considered an excuse.
So do you think the legislation was written?
It's like saying, the changes to seatbelt laws. or the changes to the child safety sets,
Yeah.
or the changes to a licensing department. It's no excuse.
So do you think the legislation was written for agents rather than
No.
for the general public?
It is actually very simply written.
Yeah.
It was dumbed down,
Yeah.
really. I mean,
Not.
it was dumbed down.
Yeah.
It was very simply, listen, if you want to get into the legislation, fine.
Yeah.
Because it is from legislation that regulation is written.
Yeah.
I have learned so much about this.
But
But the
given there was
regulation-
so much confusion about it.
Why? What is the Blue Mountains Group, very active, short term. And somebody said, well, do I register? I host somebody in my house. Yes, you register.
Yeah.
Because you are a residential dwelling. You are a hosted accommodation. Please, I think I've got to the stage where I know so much about it. I think I get it.
Yeah.
Tell me what the confusion is, and I'll try and answer the question.
No, the confusion was who needs to register. I thought everybody did. Tonight I've learned that in our LGA nobody does.
Because our council's stuffed up.
Because our council did a really good
might
job
have
years
stuffed
ago
up.
Well, they
by
might-
having
they didn't.
exempt development in, what do you call it, short-term stays?
Short-term stay becomes, what's the exact wording? I think it's exempt compliant use of compliant development of residential
There's a lot of
dwellings.
compliant development out there.
Well, I think it's tremendous.
You know.
that You've been able to explain it to us because, like I
Does
said,
it
I knew
make
people that I met
sense?
in the shopping centre just very recently.
Who are very smart people who didn't know neither. So now we all know.
Does it make sense? Did I
Yes, it
explain
does.
it?
Oh yeah, it makes sense.
It does.
It's interesting, however, that I've actually said to some of my owners, the requirements that we do for you every year, we, as a business, because I'm married to the next client, believe me, we are very strict about our smoke alarms, basically, in our properties. They are checked, they are certified every year by a licensed electrician. This fire safety standard actually takes it one step further. That you've got to have, God help us, fire extinguishers and fire blankets in property, in kitchens. Now, any long-term manager, particularly in party areas, knows that, are a bit of a worry.
And the extinguishers would probably have to be replaced after.
Then they don't expire as quickly as they used to.
Yeah.
You know, I think the old ones were.
You know, so they
It's
tag.
usually 3
They
years.
tag.
And you've
I
got
think
to,
it
you've got
used
to
to
be
be-
tagged every year. I think it's
No,
3
no,
years or something like
Yeah,
that.
they can tag them now
Probably
for
haven't got one
3
over
years.
there.
3 years.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it used to be every year,
Yeah.
and they also
They have to be checked every
they also lost their charge a lot quicker than they do
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
that's one of the issues with this registration, though, isn't it? One thing is you need to go online and register. The other thing is you've got to agree to be compliant to the
compliance.
legislation.
Yeah.
Yes.
Which means that you either have electronic smoke alarms, you need to have fire
The blankets
extinguishers
and
Yep.
and fire blankets.
Yes,
So-
and evacuation diagrams.
So if you're a private owner
Yep.
and you're not licensed for accommodation, you need to make sure your house then,
Your residential
Compliant.
residential dwelling.
has a
All
smoke
of
alarm,
those.
And
has a fire
Yep.
extinguisher, has
And
fire
there's
blanket.
And a plan- an evacuation plan.
Alarms have got to be one.
Yes, no, they don't. We changed it.
They changed back.
Thank goodness.
So it's not
But-
hardwired, it's only battery.
No, what you can have hardwired, and a lot of people do.
Yeah.
What it is now, they have to be interconnected. So if a smoke alarm goes off in your kitchen, it must go off in the bedroom.
Right, okay.
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 Right?
Makes sense.
It's not quite as bad as it sounds. It's a bit of a bats rip-off. company.
Yes, it creates an opportunity for
It
electricians to
creates
get paid $99 an hour.
opportunity for people. You can
Yeah.
have
Remember that?
You
Oh,
can
God.
have battery operated as long as they are the 10-year lithium ion.
Wow.
Well, I think
Batteries.
our local government area is probably 50 miles of the most Airbnb
Yeah.
type property
Yeah.
in New South
Yeah.
Wales. I don't know how many properties we've got or rooms we've got, but If this sort of if the legislation is like in the other four papers below us, you can imagine the screen when it comes through and it's hit, and the people who are going to be responsible, it's going to be the council,
Yeah.
because they're supposed to be policing it.
Yeah.
You can imagine the screen between the elders and the local government association.
Yeah.
It'd be another burden which we can't actually do
Yeah.
because we haven't got the funds.
And this is where I fought, trying to get, again, the public service box. Gosh, you've got to make this, you've got to collect enough money to be able to give the funds to LGAs to police this, because they're going to be the ones. And they have honestly no idea that councils run on shoestring budgets.
Wow.
Absolutely no comprehension of it whatsoever. Now, honestly, $200 a year or $150 a year, you might have, I'm sorry, I've just paid my car reg on it.
600.
Business.
Hundreds of dollars, yeah.
Between Greensleep and Red. You know, if you are earning money, there is a cost associated with that. And I'm hoping personally that in the 12-month review, when we see the actual numbers and see what the onus is going to be back on councils to police this.
So what's the
Because
benefit?
it's going to take, in this council, it is going to take a full-time compliance officer
So
who not only has to be available Monday to Friday, they're going to have to be available after hours and weekends.
So what's the benefit then? What does it bring the average punter?
As in, who's the punter, and if you ever use
Either the guest. What's the benefit of the
Okay,
guest?
Olivia, I'm going to take you to task as chairman, and you know I'll do it.
I hope you do. I like being able to task.
Because how, as somebody who's been in the tourism industry in this town for 32 years, how dare you be so derogatory to the people who drive the economy of this town? They're not a punter, they're our guests, they're our visitors.
Punter is a colloquialism in the Australian language that basically says the average person.
It's a gambler.
No. The average punter is the average person.
I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
yeah.
I'm sorry, in hospitality, any hotelier or motel staff would be fired on the spot. Any of the resort staff would be fired on the spot for calling them a punter because it became derogatory.
Yeah, that's fine.
That's not what
Luckily,
he
I don't work
meant.
for
That's not what he
resorts.
meant.
I'm a self-employed
He
person.
just
so I'll
he
call
wants to know
whatever I
what's the
like.
benefit.
However, what's the benefit
To
to the average person?
Which one, guest or host?
Both. Because it's more more bureaucracy for the host. It's more
Absolutely.
money out of his pocket.
But they're also earning out of it.
Oh, absolutely they are.
Absolutely.
But it's not the government's right to take money out of people's pockets. So that's what I'm trying to understand what the benefit is.
Full taxes.
Ah, thank you.
Yeah.
As long as you can be honest about it and say it's another way of
Hang on a
taxing
minute.
people, that's fine.
What it's doing in this legislation is making sure that people are aware of their obligations under the Code of Conduct to guests, to their neighbourhood, to their community, and there are obligations all the way around there. It is also ensuring guest safety, which many hosts are not doing.
So we've had a lot of people dying as a result of the lack of
We
legislation.
will have.
We had a little boy die
We had a
3 years ago in the Jindabyne.
In a short-term rental property fire.
Yeah, on the ground, there was a floor, it wasn't a double story. A fire, someone lit the fire with petrol or something, and the fire burst out. He got scared and went and hid behind the refrigerator. The house burned down, and he was with it. The rest of the family got out. And I don't know what the outcome of the coroner's inquiry on that was.
If there'd been a fire extinguisher in that house,
It would have probably
it would have probably saved the 3-year-old's life. And do we have to wait for somebody to die to ensure that we're doing the best that we can to protect them?
I can remember the Queensland where they
Childers.
children, so that put the skids under everyone.
Absolutely.
And I remember the council at this time, this council here, when it was
That's when you changed everything.
changed everything, and they put a special officer on to do the work, to to go around and do all the properties, check all the fire stuff and make sure they register them and all the other stuff.
Yep.
And after 2 years, they had managed to, and I remember there because I was on the council of the Surrey River, I asked the question, can you give me the numbers of what our registered properties are that you check the firefighting equipment with? And they said 120. And I said, well, that's interesting. I said, so how did you get your 120? First of all, they did all their own council did, all their own properties, like council chambers, halls, and everything they're responsible for. Then they did all the food premises, and you add them all together, it was 110. So that's interesting that you've done 110, you've done all the council stuff plus all the food premises because you do them in normal inspections and you do health stuff. So what about all the motels, hotels, accommodation units and all the rest of it now? We haven't interested in that. And then the whole lot just died because they couldn't
They
finance.
did get a bit antsy with the motels.
They got a bit antsy, but then it just sort of died. And
It just died.
happened, and after that, the mergers sort of happened, and it even died further because of the obvious reasons.
You know, I mean, I'm sorry, but is it?
And don't forget, we've still got 3 operating LEPs, one for Coombe, one for Bombay, and one here, which haven't been merged together.
Yeah.
So you'll go if you go through this here, this LEP here, you'll have to do the same as the Coombe one, and you'll have to do the same as the one from Bombay until they're merged. So you're probably going to have 3 different standards for 3 different areas. That's going to be fun too.
Everything I do when I look at property here in Jindabyne, I've got to look at the old LAP. And
Still working that way.
you know,
It's been for a while.
it's not. I'm upset that you think it's about a government gouge for money.
I've got to see the benefits. I don't
Well,
understand the
I can
benefits.
tell you a government gouge. The $450,000 or $500,000, which was paid by the state government to local government for the firefighting and fire brigade and all that stuff, has now been shifted from the state government back into the rate system. So we have to find now another $450,000 or nearly $500,000, which is basically our 2% increase in our rates. So that's the sort of stuff that's happening all the time.
Yeah, and I think, listen, short-term rentals, holiday rentals, been around for eons, for a long time, long before Airbnb came along. What happened, and in those when I first started my business, the only people allowed to advertise on stays were licensed real estate agents, because agents were accountable, right? We had legislation, we had licensed trust funds, blah, 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 blah. And it was actually brought up to state government at the time. Hang on a minute, why is it that stays when we're not a licensed trust fund? Because they were taking people's money. So that's why I'm so sure. Airbnb take people's money. It isn't a licensed trust fund. Every cent that I take in has to go into a licensed trust fund, and I'm audited every year. So this company is raking in billions of Australian dollars every year that is just going into a bank account, probably in Ireland, or somewhere else, before it's flipped out. If Airbnb, what would you think if Airbnb decided tomorrow that they were going to shut up shop in Australia and just walked away and went, no, money's not here.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's.
You know.
I'm not a fan of Airbnb by any means.
I don't think any of us are. His speech at Skiff this week was bizarre.
Yeah, no, I've got to listen to that. I got sent a copy of it today. I've got to listen to it.
Bizarre.
Who was this?
Brian Chesky, who's the mouthpiece
Oh,
for Airbnb. For a couple, uni students that were broke only 30 years ago to be controlling the sort of money that they do. So what happened? This all only came about because Airbnb hit Australian shores. What they did was let every man and his dog host a property. Right? And with no training, no regulation, no nothing to set them up to operate. We're in the hospitality industry. It just happens to be in property, right? And there are certain skills that we all need to do that across both sectors of it. And then the complaints started rolling in, the party houses.
Yeah.
Sydney mainly.
Sorry?
In Sydney.
Mainly in Sydney, in the
They
capital.
put legislation up and now
Yeah.
it's coming out to the country.
Yeah, well, Sydney is it's going to be interesting because they've capped Sydney for non-hosted properties at 180 days a year,
Yeah.
which is basically every weekend and school holidays, which to all intents and purposes probably isn't going to have much effect on the party houses.
Yeah.
They are still going to do it.
Yeah.
What should have the effect is this code of conduct where neighbours can complain and a host can be fined.
Yeah.
But, you know, somebody complained in one of the social media groups about, oh, you know, my guests are being noisy and my neighbours have complained to me, and I went, good. But it's the chicken versus the egg.
Yeah.
What this host did not know was that he could report these guests to fair trading
Yeah.
and they could be held accountable.
Can be held accountable.
A guest, when under this code of conduct, a guest can be held accountable. And it's like a residential tenancy lease, where very similar, where you agree not to cause a neighbourhood disturbance, that you agree to abide by noise pollution laws,
The house rules.
Yeah.
So yeah, guests can be totally held accountable, and that's one of the parts of this code of conduct. It's not all about making the hosts totally responsible. But it was interesting, someone came first. Okay, chicken or the egg. And it's because of the complaints. There was a lot of pressure in the 7 years from AHA. They actually wanted it to be made commercial. Well, it's where they couldn't quite override the federal tax rules that said we don't care if it's a residential investment property, whether it's an ecotourism or whatever, if you're not a registered business, it's the same as long-term rental, and they treat the income exactly the same. So you're not a business per se under federal tax rules. It is the management, and this has been really hard to explain to people. Everybody going, oh, well, I want my $5,000 and I want my ABN. Well, the property itself is not subject to that. It is the management of whether the property is owned by a self-managed super fund, which is eligible for an ABN, or whether the host is eligible for an
Earning the
ABN.
income, yeah.
You know, so it's been quite a complex issue to try and get through to people. So does that help? There's lots of stuff about
Huge. It's huge. I mean, I certainly learned something this afternoon.
Yeah, same.
you know.
Absolutely.
Oak Ridge.
Yeah.
Oh no, because I totally
Of what's
agree.
coming.
The onus is going to come back on council.
Yeah. And unless
And the fact that, you know, I keep saying, gosh, you've got to give councils enough money to administer this. And they haven't. This council is going to need, should need 2 full-time compliance officers. To go around and go and the rest.
Yeah.
It'll be to go back through every single DA for this property that is listed on an ATA. They're saying they're exempt. Well, why are they exempt? Oh, we're an ecotourism, we're service departments, holiday dwelling, whatever.
Why did it make a difference in ecotourism? Like, you know,
Because
like, why is that
stupidly,
different?
I believe there's some kind of a business with scruples.
with scruples and requirements over them, and there isn't any. But it was, you know, if you look up the definition of service departments under state planning rules, the state SEP, all it says, the definition of a service department is a property that is cleaned on a regular basis by the manager owner or owner's representative. So
Right.
what they exactly,
It's like every place, isn't it?
Yeah.
really.
Yeah.
But the salient word there is the manager.
Yeah.
What does and
Implying
that
a profession
definition
of some kind.
has not been changed. Excuse me, in 35 years. This is a service apartment complex. It has on-site management, but even that has changed. And we've seen a few of them, particularly with COVID, change. This is actually a strata. There is an owners' corporation behind this whole complex. And owners have the right to choose who they wish to manage it.
Yeah.
Right? So there is no legal obligation under the DA approval. It depends on how a developer writes it up, and it's actually been challenged a lot. Developers used to try to put into these sorts of developments that they had to sign up with the management company, and it was actually proven to be illegal, which is
Legislation.
it wasn't
Planning
legislation. It had to be done. Yeah, exactly. But we've seen, is it one of the, not Mantras, Oaks in Melbourne, I think have disbanded 5 of their service department blocks, leaving owners out of pocket by millions.
Really?
Just walked away, said we're not doing it anymore. And these owners, owing owners tens of thousands of dollars, which is interesting because by law, I'm covered under a trust fund.
Yeah.
Now, to get a licensed trust fund with a bank, I actually had to have a company structure, an ABN, when they were introduced, and a full real estate license that allowed me to operate a trust account. And I had to prove all of that to the bank, and that is registered with fair trading.
Yeah.
So it's really, really big issue. But so this because we've now got, we think, and we'll know when people register or don't. It's about half professionally managed, self-managed, and we won't know that until we see the numbers.
So when you get, just probably for me, the last question, when you seek an exemption,
Yes.
do you have to seek the exemption with the Department of Fair
No.
Trading? Just with the
You
OTA?
just tell the OTA that you are exempt.
Okay. And there's no license, there's no payment you make for that?
No,
Sounds quite strange, doesn't it, really?
no,
No?
it's the way they stupidly put this legislation
Yes,
through.
I'm glad you said stupidly. Yeah.
Like I said, that was the pressure from the Australian Resident Accommodation Managers Association in the working group at the time when the legislation was written up.
Yeah.
Because we don't have them here, but you've just got to go to Merimbula
Yeah.
and Bermagui and every semi-retirement place up and down the New South Wales coast where people go in and semi-retire and they buy management rights to these smaller complexes, the 5. And that's their retirement income. They buy a unit and they do the grounds and they make money out of the bookings and blah, 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 blah. And they fought vehemently. And what they were scared of, New South Wales being the first state to do this, what they were worried about was Queensland and the Gold Coast.
Yeah, of course.
They were terrified
Of course.
that if they allowed service departments in this legislation in New South Wales, that when the other states copy, and they will because they're the first state to do it, that it would have gone on to the Gold Coast. That's what they were protecting.
Does anybody else have any questions? for Joan?
He would be good.
If anybody out there in cyber world, if you're either watching it live or you're going to be watching...
Let me just see what.
If you've got any questions, feel free to go directly to Joan Bird,
Yep.
Railway Principal up here in Jindabyne, or if you want to, either through myself or Fiona, we can direct questions.
Yeah.
But
Any
certainly,
questions?
We've got very lucky to have Joan in town who's got so much knowledge on this. It will be a huge benefit to get questions, because questions will allow change to occur.
Absolutely.
If nobody says anything, then nothing, of course, will happen.
No.
All right. Awesome. Thanks, guys. Thank you, Joan.
Pleasure. Sorry I get so dumbed out.
Cheers.
No, it's
Good night.
We need that level of information, because like I said, I rang up Department of Fair Trading,
Oh, they would have flogged it off.
and,
They
and,
didn't
and the
want
guy just had absolutely zero
No
idea. It points towards an email address to ask questions.
Yep.
And the guy quite honestly said, don't send to that email address.
Oh,
Because
gosh.
nobody's actually answering any emails.
Can I get a photo? I'm just going to take some photos of those pages and I'll put them
Oh,
on the
that's.
website.
I bought the fire safety. If
Is
anybody
it?
wanted
Yeah.
it.
All right. Okay. I'll put that up
Good
too.
night, everybody. Thank you very much.
Thank you.